Most people think the most dangerous part of a cruise is the water. They're wrong. The water is just what keeps you from running away. Where are you watching from, and are you watching alone? Subscribe and stay. Darius had spent 11 months planning the trip. Not obsessively, not in a way that his wife Petra would have called a problem, but steadily, the way a careful man plans something he genuinely wants to get right. He had a spreadsheet with cabin options. He had printed out the deck plans and highlighted the ones with unobstructed balcony views. He had compared every 14-night Mediterranean itinerary he could find until he landed on one that hit 4 countries and still had enough sea days to feel like a real rest. Or he told Petra it was going to be the best 2 weeks of their marriage. She told him he said that every anniversary. He said he meant it this time. They boarded in Barcelona on a warm Tuesday morning in late July. The terminal was loud and busy and smelled like sunscreen and coffee, and Darius felt a specific kind of happiness he rarely allowed himself. The kind that comes from standing at the beginning of something you have waited a long time for. He and Petra walked up the gangway, shoulder to shoulder, handed over their key cards, and stepped into a ship so large that the interior felt less like a vessel and more like a city that had decided to move. There were restaurants, bars, a theater, a casino, a pool deck that stretched the length of a football pitch. When Darius stood at the railing on their first evening and watched Barcelona shrink behind them until it was just lights, and then nothing. And he told Petra this was exactly right. She agreed. They met Radek on the second night. He was at the table beside theirs in the formal dining room. A wide-shouldered man in his mid-40s, with a loud, easy laugh, and the kind of confidence that made rooms feel smaller. His partner, a quiet woman named Solveig, sat beside him and mostly watched the room with calm, steady eyes. Radek introduced himself before the appetizers arrived. He had a way of doing this that made it feel like he was doing you a favor, like being noticed by him was the thing you had been waiting for. He ordered a bottle of wine for the table without asking, whereas he made a joke about the bread rolls that was not particularly funny, but that Darius laughed at anyway, because Radek laughed first and laughed fully, and it was easier to follow. By the third night, they were sharing a table deliberately. By the 5th, they were meeting before dinner for drinks on the upper deck. Radek and Darius would walk the bow after the meal, while Petra and Solveig sat with dessert wine and talked about things neither man asked about later. It was the kind of fast, effortless friendship that happens most easily on a ship. 2 people with nothing to prove, no shared history to navigate, just the present and the ocean and nowhere to be. Radek asked questions the way people do when they are genuinely curious, or the way people do when they have learned to seem that way. He asked which cabin they were in, casually, or during a conversation about the deck layout. He asked whether Petra wore much jewelry on trips like this. He said Solveig always overdressed for dinners and always worried about losing something. And Darius said Petra had brought a few nice pieces, including the diamond earrings she had worn on their wedding day, and a bracelet he had given her on their 10th anniversary. He said it without thinking. He said it the way you say things to someone you already think of as a friend. Radek nodded. He said the bracelet sounded beautiful. Then he moved the conversation on. On the 6th night, Radek asked, laughing as he said it, whether Darius was an early morning runner. He said he had seen someone jogging on deck 3 at 6 in the morning and thought it might have been him. Darius said yes, Every morning the same circuit. He said Petra slept in, so he left the cabin unlocked rather than wake her when he came back. He said it was probably fine. They were on a ship after all. Where was anyone going to go? Radek laughed at that. He agreed. He said, "You were right. Where would anyone go?" They docked in Valletta on the morning of the 7th day. Petra woke Darius before 6. She was standing at the foot of the bed with her jewelry pouch open, and her face had the particular stillness that comes before something breaks. She said the earrings were gone, the bracelet was gone. Her grandmother's ring, which she had not mentioned to anyone on this trip, was gone. He told her to check again. She had already checked. He told her they must have slipped somewhere in the lining. She turned the pouch inside out and held it up and said nothing else. And they went to the security office. The officer was a compact, efficient man who took their details with a precision that managed to feel both professional and completely unhurried, which was its own kind of maddening. He filled in a form. He asked whether the cabin had been left unsecured at any point. Darius said no, and believed it when he said it, and then took 3 seconds to hear what he had just said and understand that he had lied without knowing he was lying. He changed his answer. He said yes briefly during his morning run. The officer noted this without any particular change in expression. Darius asked to speak with Radek and Solveig. He wanted to ask them if they had seen anyone in the corridor. He thought they might have been up early. The officer asked for the cabin number. He found it. He looked at his screen for a moment. He told Darius that the passengers in that cabin had disembarked earlier that morning during the early port window, before most of the ship was awake. Darius felt the floor of the conversation drop away beneath him. He went back to security twice more that day. The second visit produced a different officer who said the same things in different words. The third produced a written assurance that the matter would be documented and passed to the relevant authorities in Malta, and that given the multinational nature of the voyage, jurisdiction was a layered question that would take time to navigate. He was given a reference number on a small card. He still has that card. He has never received any update attached to it. He spent the remaining 7 nights of the cruise trying to reconstruct every conversation he had with Radek, every question, every joke, every moment of easy, generous, unhurried friendship. He laid them all out in his head like photographs on a table and looked at them with a new understanding of what they actually were. A patient, methodical extraction of exactly the information needed. Cabin number. Jewelry confirmed present. Balcony door or cabin door left open during a predictable window every morning. It had taken Radek 4 evenings to collect all 3 pieces, and he had done it across wine and laughter and the ambient sound of the sea. And Darius had handed every piece over freely and warmly and felt good about it. He filed a full report at home. He followed up for 8 months. Nothing came back. He posted about it on a travel forum 2 years later in a thread about cruise security. He wrote that he did not want sympathy. He wrote that he wanted people to understand something specific, that the preparation was what made it work. Not luck, not opportunism. A deliberate, practiced warmth deployed over multiple evenings against 2 people who had no reason to be suspicious of warmth. He wrote that what he remembered most was not the loss. It was the conversation on the 5th night when he had thought, this man could become a real friend. He wrote that he replays that thought often. He wrote that he is not sure what to do with the fact that the feeling was completely real and completely manufactured at the same time. He wrote, "The ocean hides a lot of things. It hid them in plain sight, at our table, every night for 6 nights, week, and that is where I will leave Darius. Not in the security office, not in the corridor outside an empty cabin, but at that dinner table, pouring wine, laughing, understanding nothing. Because that is where the real thing happened. Everything else was just the reveal." Thessaly had done everything the solo travel forums told her to do. She had researched the ship for 3 weeks before booking. She had read every safety article she could find about women traveling alone on cruise lines. She had saved a document on her phone with the cabin number, the ship's emergency line, the port agent contacts for every stop on the itinerary. She had told 2 people at home her exact schedule, port by port, night by night. She had done all of it. And she felt prepared in the way that only becomes frightening later. The way that makes you wonder what preparation is actually worth when the thing that finds you is patient enough to move around it. She was 26. The cruise was 12 nights in the Caribbean. She had saved for it for almost 2 years, not because she was poor, but because she was careful. And she wanted it to be the kind of trip she would remember as the first big thing she did entirely on her own terms. She boarded on a Saturday evening in late October and stood on the upper deck as the Florida coastline fell away and felt something she described later as terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. The feeling of being completely untethered. The ship was large, several thousand passengers. The kind of scale that makes you feel simultaneously lost and safe. Because there are always people around you, which feels like protection, until you realize that a crowd is not the same thing as someone who knows you are there. She noticed Vidal on the second afternoon. He was a crew member, that's a steward, working the upper deck bar area. And the first time he appeared was when he refilled her water glass without being asked and told her the sun was going to drop behind the clouds in about 20 minutes if she wanted to move to a better spot. He was pleasant, quick. He moved on before she had finished saying thank you. She thought nothing of it. He was at the same bar that evening. He remembered that she had ordered a lime soda in the afternoon and asked if she wanted another. She said yes. He brought it in under 2 minutes. She tipped him and went back to her book. On the 3rd day, she saw him twice. On the 4th day, she saw him 3 times in 3 different locations across the ship. Upper deck in the morning, the buffet corridor at noon, the stern bar in the evening. Each time he acknowledged her. Not aggressively, not in a way she could point at and call wrong. Just the nod of a crew member who recognizes a regular face. Just professional recognition. She told herself that. She told herself that on the 5th day, too, when he appeared at the entrance of the dining room she had chosen for dinner and stood near the podium for 40 seconds before being redirected somewhere else by another crew member. She told herself that on the 6th day, when she changed her morning routine deliberately, earlier start, different deck, and saw him at the far end of that deck within the first 20 minutes, where she did not change her routine again after that. She did not want to confirm to herself that she was doing it. On the 5th night, the ship anchored off a small island for an overnight stop. The lights from the shore were visible from the upper deck, small, warm, and very far away. She went to a lounge on deck 9 around 9 in the evening, had 2 drinks, watched the lights, felt almost calm. When she stood to leave, Vidal was at the bar across the room. He saw her. He walked over. He said the lights were much better from the observation deck on deck 12. if she had not been up there yet. He said he was finishing his shift and could show her the exact spot. She said she was tired. She said, "Thank you, good night," and she walked away without looking back. And the entire walk from the lounge to the elevator, she felt her spine tighten the way it does when you believe something is behind you. She got to her cabin. She used all 3 of the interior locks, the handle lock, the deadbolt, and the security latch she had not touched since boarding. She sat on the edge of her bunk in the narrow cabin and looked at the door. Somewhere after midnight, she heard footsteps in the corridor. Slow footsteps. The kind with no particular destination. They stopped outside her cabin. She saw the shadow in the thin line of light beneath the door, a shape that stayed still for what she later counted as approximately 30 seconds. 30 seconds of stillness. 30 seconds of the shadow not moving, the ship breathing around it, the ocean doing nothing. No one anywhere near. Then it moved on. She sat awake until 4 in the morning. When the sky outside the porthole started to change color, she got dressed, packed a small bag with her most important things, and went to the guest services desk. She asked to be moved to a different cabin. She gave no reason. The woman at the desk looked at her face with an expression that asked a question without speaking it. Thessaly did not answer the unspoken question. She waited. The agent typed something, checked something, typed again, and then printed a new key card for a cabin on deck 11. Different corridor, different section, different part of the ship entirely. Before she left the desk, Thessaly asked one question. She asked whether crew members had access to passenger cabin corridors during off-duty hours. The agent said no. Absolutely not. Staff corridors and passenger corridors were entirely separate. Crew members were not permitted in passenger areas outside of their assigned duties. She said it clearly and quickly and without hesitation. Too quickly, Thessaly thought. The kind of quick that happens when you have said something often enough that you no longer think about whether it is true. She moved to the new cabin alone, carrying her own bag, telling no one. She did not see Vidal again until the second to last day of the cruise. She was in a crowded dining room. He was across the room. He looked at her for 3 seconds. Not long, not aggressive, just a flat, calibrating look, and then looked away and did not look back. On the final morning, an hour before disembarkation, she filed a report. She was told it would be reviewed, where she asked what reviewed meant in this context. She was told her concern had been documented. She asked whether the documentation would result in any kind of investigation. The person at the desk said they couldn't confirm the specifics of any internal process. She walked off the ship into warm air and sunshine and stood on the pier for a long time before she moved. She wrote about it later, online, in the same forum where I found Darius's account. She wrote that she did not know what had happened. She could not prove that anything had happened. She could not prove the shadow was him. She could not prove the sightings across the ship were anything other than coincidence, amplified by anxiety. And she wrote that she had run the other explanation, that she was a nervous solo traveler who had projected danger onto a crew member doing his job, and she could not get it to hold. She had tested it against every moment. It did not hold. She wrote, "I know what I know. I know what I felt. And I know that the ocean makes everything harder to prove because there are no traffic cameras in the middle of the Caribbean Sea and no witnesses who were watching the right corridor at the right time. and I know that some people count on that. She wrote, I counted to 30. I counted his shadow. It stayed for 30 full seconds, and then it left. And I will never know if leaving was a decision or a delay. I think about those 30 seconds more than she probably wants me to. This is the one I have been most reluctant to write. I have had it for almost 2 years. I have started it a dozen times and stopped. Not because I do not know what happened. I know all of it, but because the person it happened to is someone I love. And writing it means making it a story. And she is not a story. She is a person who got on a ship with someone she trusted and got off alone. I am calling her Miriam. That is not her name. She asked me not to use it, and I will not. Miriam was 34. She had been with her partner, a man I will call Callum, for 6 years. They lived together. They shared a bank account. She had a drawer in the bathroom that still had his things in it when she came home. 6 years is a long time. 6 years is long enough to know someone's walk, their voice, the specific way they stand when they are thinking about something they are not going to say. When Callum had chosen the cruise, a North Atlantic crossing, 10 nights, departing from a port in northern England and arriving in Canada. Not a warm weather trip. Not the kind of thing you see in the brochures with the blue water and the cocktails. This was gray ocean and cold air, and a ship that felt genuinely isolated in a way that the Mediterranean routes never quite do. Callum said there was something profound about a North Atlantic crossing. He said the scale of it changed how you thought. He said he had been wanting to do it for years. Miriam said she was not particularly drawn to it, but that she would go anywhere with him. That she trusted his choices the way she trusted most things about him, completely, and with a confidence she had never once stopped to examine. The ship was smaller than a standard liner, a few hundred passengers. She had the kind of intimacy that meant you saw the same faces repeatedly, that you learned the layout quickly, that the world shrank to a manageable and inescapable size within the first 48 hours. Miriam said it felt like a village. She said the first 2 days that feeling was interesting. By the third day, it felt like something else. The first night, Callum came back late. She was already asleep. She heard him come in. She registered it, half-conscious, and heard him say he had been at the bar with a man he had met on the observation deck. She said okay and fell back asleep. She did not think about it at all. The second night she was still awake when he came in after midnight. She asked which bar. He told her the one on deck 5. She said nothing else, and she lay in the dark after he fell asleep and thought about nothing in particular, and told herself she was being the thing he sometimes told her she was. Anxious, suspicious, someone who turned nothing into a problem. In the morning, she went to the Deck 5 bar and asked what time it closed. The bartender said 11. She said thank you and ordered a coffee. She mentioned it to Callum that afternoon without framing it as an accusation. She said she had walked past the bar and it looked closed. He said he had moved on to the one at the stern after 11. He said it without pausing. He had the answer before she finished asking the question. She told herself that was not meaningful. She told herself there are many reasons a person knows what they are going to say. She told herself a lot of things that week, and on the 7th night, she followed him. She waited 5 minutes after he left. then walked out of the cabin and down the corridor in the direction he had gone. The ship at 2 a.m. had a specific quality she had not experienced before. Not silence exactly, because the engines were always there. That constant low vibration coming through the floor and the walls, but a stillness over everything. A sense of the world contracted to just this vessel and the black water on every side of it. The corridor lights ran in low orange strips along the ceiling. Her footsteps were very quiet. His were ahead of her, just audible, not looking back. He went to deck 4. He walked to a cabin near the middle of the corridor, knocked twice with a particular rhythm. Not a stranger's knock, not a maintenance knock, a knock that knew what was on the other side. And the door opened, and he went in. Miriam stood in that corridor. The ship moved underneath her in the slow, inevitable way it had been moving for 7 days. The corridor hummed. She could hear nothing through the door. She stood there long enough to be completely certain about what she had seen and completely certain that certainty was not going to help her. And then she walked back to their cabin and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark with her hands in her lap. He came back near 3 a.m. He turned on the light and saw her sitting there, and she watched his face do what it did. Not guilt, not fear, but a very specific 3-second adjustment. The calculation, the quick, practiced inventory of what she could possibly know and how much of that she could prove, and what the correct response was to each possible version of events. She told him what she had seen. She said it plainly. She said she had followed him. She said she had seen him knock on the door of a cabin on deck 4 and go inside. He told her she was confused. He said the lighting in the corridors was disorienting at night. He said she must have followed someone else. There were hundreds of passengers on this ship, and he was not the only man in a dark jacket. He said this with a patience that she recognized, a trained, careful patience that sounded like kindness and operated like pressure. She said she knew his walk. She said she had followed him across 4 corridors, and she knew what she had seen. He said she was doing this again. He said this was the pattern. She found something to turn into a problem, and then she needed him to perform the solution for her until she felt secure enough to stop. He said he was tired of it. He said he had spent 6 years managing this, and he was tired. He said the crossing had clearly been too much for her, and the most useful thing she could do was calm down and get some sleep. He said all of this quietly and steadily and without raising his voice once. She asked to sleep in a separate cabin. She said she would arrange it in the morning. He said that was not going to happen. He said he was not going to let her embarrass them both by making a scene on a ship this size where you saw everyone twice a day. He said they were going to sleep and talk about it like adults when she was thinking clearly. He turned off the light. He got into bed. He was asleep inside 20 minutes, or did an exceptionally good impression of it. She lay beside him and stared at the ceiling of the cabin in the dark and felt the specific fear that has nothing to do with a stranger. The fear of a familiar room, the fear of a voice you have known for 6 years, telling you that what you saw with your own eyes is not what you think it is. The fear of realizing how long you have been learning to doubt yourself inside a relationship, and that this moment, this ship, this black water, this locked room is just the place where you finally ran out of room to keep doing it. She did not sleep. At 6 a.m, she went to guest services. There was one staff member at the desk, a young woman who looked at Miriam's face and did not ask many questions. Yet then Miriam said she had a personal situation with her traveling companion and needed to be moved to a different cabin immediately. She said immediately with a steadiness that must have communicated something specific, because the woman nodded and began typing without pushing back. 7 minutes later, Miriam had a new key card for a cabin on deck 10 and was told her belongings would be moved within the hour if she wanted assistance. She said she would move them herself. 3 nights left. 3 nights in the middle of the North Atlantic with no land in any direction and no way off the ship, and a man who now knew she had gone to the front desk and would be working out what that meant and what she was prepared to do. She stayed in the new cabin as much as she could. She ate at odd hours when the dining areas were thin, where she took a different route to every place she needed to go. She saw Callum once on the second of those 3 nights, standing at the rail of the observation deck near the bow. He had his back to her. He did not turn around. She did not approach. She stood 60 feet away and looked at the back of someone she had planned her future with and felt something she could not name. Not quite grief, not quite relief, not quite anger. Something below all of those. Something that only has a name in the context of open water and no exit. The ship docked. She disembarked in the early wave before he was likely to be at the gangway. She took a taxi to a hotel she had booked on her phone the night before. She sat on the edge of the hotel bed in a room she had chosen by herself and called her sister. That was when she cried. Not on the ship. Not in the corridor on deck 4. Not in the dark beside him. In a hotel room on solid ground, an hour after arriving, she finally let the thing move through her. She changed her number 3 weeks later. She sold the apartment. She rebuilt the shape of her daily life from the walls inward, slowly, the way you do when someone has been standing in too many rooms for too long. She told me that the thing she returns to, the image that does not leave, is the corridor on deck 4. The orange light. The engines underneath her. The particular quality of the ship's silence at 2 a.m. in the middle of the ocean. She said she stood in that corridor and understood, in the clearest possible way, that she was completely alone. Not alone because Callum was not there. Alone because the person she had brought to feel safe was the reason she could not feel safe. And the water was on every side. And there was no land. And there was no way off. She said, "A cruise ship is the only place in the world where you can look in every direction and see nothing but the horizon." And I thought that sounded like freedom before I went. On the way home, it sounded like something else. She said, "Some things you do not understand until the exit is gone." I think about Miriam when I think about these 3 stories together. I think about Darius at his dinner table, feeling the warmth of a friendship that was really an audit. I think about Thessaly counting to 30 in the dark, measuring a shadow she could never prove was what she knew it was. And I think about Miriam standing at a closed door in orange corridor light, in the ship moving, the ocean doing nothing, understanding something she could not unknow. These things happen on water, in the space between ports, in the part of the journey that the photographs never capture. The 3 a.m. part, the locked door part, the standing alone in a corridor not knowing which way to walk part. The ships keep going, the itineraries keep selling, and somewhere right now on some ship in some ocean, someone is at a dinner table or in a lounge or lying in a cabin in the dark, and something is not right. And they are still deciding whether to trust what they feel. I hope they do. I hope they move before they have to count to 30. I hope they ask to move cabins before the morning. I hope they walk off that gangway with everything they arrived with. Every piece of jewelry, every sense of safety, in every version of themselves they came aboard with. But the ocean keeps secrets better than anywhere else on Earth. And some people know exactly how to use that. If this reached you tonight, turn on notifications. Share it. Because these stories deserve to be heard on solid ground, where there are still exits. The water has no memory. Someone has to.
Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more stories.